Hello YouTube frogs, Mr. Xlice here to bring you another guide video. This time we're going to be going over Klee, who's being rerun as the first 5-star character for Genshin 1.6 update. In this guide, we'll be going over 4-star and 5-star weapons, talents and priorities, constellations, attack rotation, artifact recommendations, team compositions, and ending with a rough showcase. I will be providing my estimate on where Dodoco Tales, which is the new 4-star book coming for free in the Midsummer event in 1.6, ranks, but unfortunately I cannot physically test it since this recording, which is happening about a day before 1.6's launch. I'll still be talking about it though, for sure. All right, thanks for understanding. Let's begin. Let's take a look at my Klee. I'm going to be testing her with the 4 Crimson Witch set. I already have a C6 Klee. She is Friendship 10. This was from her first banner back in 1.0 October of 2020. Unfortunately, I cannot untoggle constellations, so the damage that you'll be seeing will be higher than usual for the E and Q, which have additional 3 levels from C3 and C5. So you can see here, these are the talents. I have 8, 11, 11. So please keep in mind that when we are testing E and Q on my account, the numbers are going to be significantly higher. Not only am I level 8, but I also have plus 3 levels from constellations, okay? These are the multiplier values that you're looking at level 8. So we have 115% one-hit damage, 252% charge attack damage. E is 181%, which bounces 3 times. The mine damage is 62.3%. There's 8 mines. And then the Q, which is 81% for a single tick of damage, duration of 10 seconds. I'll be explaining more when we jump into talents on what exactly like the numbers look like. So for all these tests, we'll be running the 4 Crimson artifact set with the off piece as the mask. We have the mask as the off piece to enable swapping between crit rate and crit damage mask, balanced with crit rate and crit damage passive weapons like the Solar Pearl and Black Lip weapon. You can see here that I have a crit damage mask here and a crit rate mask, both relatively the same substats. What this means is if I were to run a crit rate weapon, I'd more likely use a crit damage mask to compensate for my lack of crit damage. Now with the crit damage weapon, I'll be lacking in crit rate, so the other mask will compensate. Make sense? Now, similar to my Yanfei video, we'll be testing nearly all the 4-star and 5-star catalysts in the game. The 5-star catalysts, which I only have the Lost Prayer at this point, they will be done on my girlfriend's account. She has Lost Prayer, Memory of Dust, and Skyward Atlas all at R1 level 80, albeit her Klee is going to be a little bit weaker than mine because she doesn't have C6 and hers is only level 80. But I will let you guys know that, please, when we're looking at the numbers for these tests, compare the 5 stars to the 5 stars, okay? My 4-star damage may be higher, but that's because my Klee is higher level with higher talents. I want to preface this by saying that all the 5-star weapons are stronger than all the 4-star weapons, no matter what. So I will not be testing out 3-star weapons this time because the upcoming event provides us with the Dodoco Tales 4-star catalyst up to R5, which is obtainable free from that event. Friendly reminder, I will go over my estimations on Dodoco Tales later in the testing, but I can't physically test it because this recording will be done prior to 1.6. All right, let's dive into talents very briefly. Okay, so when the E or normal attack deal damage, 50% chance for Klee to obtain an explosive spark. This makes her next charge attack consume no stamina and deal 50% increased damage. Now, this additional damage is in the same column as elemental damage, so the 50% damage here that you can see here translates to about 25 to 30% increase if you have around 61 to 90% pyro damage, because her ascension stat is pirate, right? So you can see here that I have 90%. So the 50% increase here would be about a 25% increase. And then the 4th ascension talent. When Klee crits with charge attack, party members gain 2 energy. Basically, this helps rotate your other 3 party members while she's on the field, because typically you'll be able to circulate about 4 to 5 charge attacks in a DPS rotation from her before running out of stamina due to dashing, and taking into account random first passive 0 stamina procs. That's about 8 to 10 energy for party members, which is pretty significant to help team rotations. I'll get into that in the attack rotation section when we're talking about like how I would recommend maximizing Klee without being too much of a headache. Her skill talents. So the normal attack, this is the bread and butter. We're going to be focusing on the first hit damage, which is 150% at level 8, and also the charge attack damage, okay? E is also bread and butter. Jumpty Dumpty damage is 181% damage at level 11. This procs 3 times, and it summons 8 mines, which each deal this multiplier amount of damage. So these pretty good multipliers, even if only 2 to the 4 mines hit the intended target. So at level 11, we see that with 3 bounces, this is about 540%. 8 mines here is almost about 500%. So if you were to hit absolutely everything at level 11, it'd be 1000% damage. Most of the time, the mines are not going to connect that way. You'll probably hit only like 2 to 4 mines. In that case, you'll still be maintaining a good solid 700% damage at level 11. So, and then Q. So Q is a 10-second duration. It's about 1.67 seconds of burst because there are 6 waves of hits. You'll be noticing in my weapon tests, you can see specifically that there are like waves of 3 to 5 hits, and there's 6 of these waves. So there's about 18 to up to 30 hits. Now, the 5 hits is relatively rare. So I would say on average, most of the tests that I've been doing, if you did full duration of this Q, you'd be hitting about 22 to 25 times before swapping out. Yeah. In my opinion, this Q skill is less of what you should focus on and should more be viewed as additional damage whenever it's available. Instead, you focus on the E and the normal attack. Cool. With that being said, in terms of leveling order, I would prioritize the E and normal attack nearly equally and leave the Q for last. Okay. Basically, what this means is like I would recommend 886. And then from there, you can decide to invest more. All right, next, a quick dive into the constellations. All right, so C1. Now, this says attacks and skills have a certain chance to summon a spark, dealing a damage equal to 120% of the sparks and splash damage. What this means is 120% of this multiplier. So 81% at level 11 means that C1 would be doing like 97%. The certain chance is from testing about 33%, but there is a problem. It can steal reactions if you're running a vaporizer melt comp. Keep that in mind. I wouldn't really pay too much attention to it. I would just play her as normal, and if you do vaporize or melt, then that's great. You do additional damage. If you don't, that's fine. And I would say 33% as a certain chance is pretty high. It's not a 33% increase in DPS. I would say more, it's probably like 10% because the damage multiplier is lower than your charge attack and your normal attack and, you know, your E. So yeah. All right, so C2. If you are a whale, this would be the constellation that entices you. So there are currently 3 sources of minus defense percent in the game. And I want to make sure this is not to be confused with resistance, okay? Resistance is like physical or elemental resistance that is different than minus defense. Klee has the highest at minus 23% with C2. There are 2 other characters in the game that currently have it. Lisa, passive talent at Ascension 4 gives minus 15%. And then Razor's C4 also is minus 50%. So Klee is the highest. This translates to about a 12% damage boost, and it's not diminishing. So if you stack it, it just continuously does additional damage until you have basically minus full defense, right? So C3, this is plus 3 levels to the E, no explanation needed. C4, this causes a big explosion when swapping Klee out during her Q. It's locked behind the C4, but this adds a large multiplier of 555% to her nuke DPS rotation, and you don't feel bad about swapping her out when her Q is alive, but unfortunately it's locked behind C4s, so it's really just well territory. C5, plus 3 levels on the Q. C6, this is 3 energy per 3 seconds while under the Q. This helps team rotation. 10% power damage bonus is nothing to write home about. It's mostly just for completion if you're a whale. Mostly the interesting ones are C1 and C2. So that's Constellations in a nutshell. All right, so let's go over briefly my recommended attack rotations for Klee. Now, as a catalyst DPSer, her main focus is maximizing the value of her charge attack with consistent usage of her E and Q whenever available. Now, regardless of what constellation you have on Klee, C0 to C6, I would maintain the same playstyle for her. In order to maximize her DPS, she's a very upfront, point-blank charge attack spammer. I lead with the E to create her minefield, and here have C2. The mines will decrease defense. This also procs for Crimson if you're running it before her main DPS rotation. After E, loop the normal attack, charge attack, and then jump dash cancel repeatedly until little to no stamina remains. On average, with her passive that reduces charge attack stamina usage to 0, she should be able to get a solid 4 to 5 loops before need to switch out. Now, keep in mind that I am using a level 20 weapon here with basically no attack, just to make sure I don't kill it. I'm also doing this because I want you guys to pay attention to the rotation rather than the damage that I'm doing in this particular instance, okay? All right, so I'm going to lead with my E. And then you have the auto charge rotation. So you see I'm doing a single auto, then I'm doing charge attack and looping it until I have basically no stamina. I do like jump canceling because it doesn't use stamina. If you do the normal charge attack and you dash cancel, you're using double the amount of stamina, which I'm not really a fan of, right? Because I want to maximize my DPS. But there are caveats to both. So jump canceling, it saves stamina, but you can get knocked back in midair. Dash canceling, you use more stamina, but you can iframe attacks. So you have a little bit more survivability. This being the case, when we go into team composition discussion, this is why I will emphasize the importance of shielders on your team to keep Klee having high resistance to interruption during her DPS combo. So if Klee's Q is up and you're running for Crimson, you lead with an E and then you E with a Q cancel. That means you E and you cancel it with your Q animation. Then you E again. This gives you 3 instead of 2 stacks of 4 Crimson buff. And then you continue doing the normal charge attack during the Q combo, and then you repeat this until you have no stamina and you're done with your DPS. So the E Q cancel in the middle procs a stack of 4 Crimson, but doesn't use the full E, which allows you to have this 3 stacks during the duration of the Q, okay? So if you're not running 4 Crimson, by the way, then you can just throw Q at the beginning of the usual sequence that you saw previously. But I'm going to demonstrate the 4 Crimson type of combo. I am at 90.4 pyro damage bonus, okay? With 4-piece Crimson, usually, if I'm only using 2 elemental skills, I'm going to be getting 50% times 2, which is 100% of this bonus. So I'll be, instead of 15% pyro damage, I'll be at 30% pyro damage. That will increase this from 90.4 to 105.4. If I do this correctly, I should be able to have 3 stacks when starting my Q. This means that I should be able to get 22.5% additional pyro damage bonus, which should lead me to 112.9. This is important to note. I do have 10% additional while my Q is up. So we're currently at 90.4, and I'm going to do the combo, and I'll show you guys what it looks like. All right, let's begin. So we have the E, and then the EQ. You can see right now, I have 115%, which is 2 stacks. But I still can throw another E down, right? So this gives me, so you see that instead of 112.9%, I have 122.9%. And during this period, where you have everything up, you can do your full auto attack cancel. This is the way that I would launch with 4 Crimson. It is, again, as follows. You throw your E down, and then you E, Q cancel, and then you throw your quote-unquote second E, right? Because you canceled the middle one. And this gives you 3 stacks of Crimson. Then you do the typical normal charge, jump, dash, cancel, and repeat that. Okay? That is the basic combos. If you don't have 4 Crimson, right, just throw the Q wherever, right? You can throw your E out first, then press Q, and then do the normal charge continuously until you're out of stamina. Okay? Or you can throw Q first and then do E and all that stuff. So either one works. There's more mechanically intensive canceling for higher DPS, like Gatling Klee, which looks something like this, where you hold your W button and you continuously do your single auto. So you can see I'm basically barely moving, right? I'm only pressing left click at a good interval whenever I see her start to move. The problem with this, in my opinion, is that it requires you to stand still and not utilize the charge attacks. Both which I find not as practical in actual fights, right? Because I value that if you do a normal charge and then you jump around, you increase your mobility, right? So you can keep on repositioning. And then once you're out, switch to your other characters, you recover your stamina back up. And then when she's ready, you throw your ear out and you start DPSing again. And then whenever your Q is out, you can just add it to the flow. So that is attack rotations for Klee. Let's get into test methodology, which is basically how I'm going to be testing. No 3-star weapons will be tested in this video because Dodoco Tails will be available as a free reward with the 1.6 event all the way to R5. We will be taking a look at the 4-star weapons first, which you can see here. Same 9 that I tested in Yanpei video. Dodoco Tails is not on this list because this recording is part of 1.6 launch. So there's no way I can get it right now. I will discuss my expectations on where it stands at R5 when comparing results. All tests will be done without reactions to keep them simple. We do have 2 elemental mastery based weapons, Mappa Mare and Sacrificial Fragments, which I will test first, but keep in mind that Dodoco Tails will be arriving soon and it will most likely outclass most of these weapons. Still be testing for completion and future players that may not have access to this new weapon, okay? After the elemental mastery weapons, I'll be testing out the energy recharge based weapons, Livonia's Codex and Wine and Song. After that, attack percent, Frost Bear versus Eye of Perception, and then crit rate based weapons, Black Cliff versus Solar Pearl. And then finally, Witsit. You guys know this as a very large bursty nuke weapon, and it's very strong when it has its passive up. I'll be testing this with no buff and with a random buff. In this case, I think the random buff that we get is elemental damage. You guys can see with elemental damage how much of an increase it is. For the 5-star weapons, I will be hopping onto my girlfriend's account like I did in the Yanpei video. Since she has Lost Prayers, Skyward Atlas, and Memory of Dust R1 at level 80, I'll explain more details on testing when we get there, okay? As a reminder, I will be using a crit rate food for these tests. It's called the Pile 'em Up. It only increases crit rate, okay, because it makes testing easier because I test crit damage numbers. This does not affect the damage output that we'll be comparing, all right? And I'll make note of the base crit rate each weapon has on its base. So typically, most of the weapons will have like 64%, 65%. They should all be maintained relatively equally. Even with switching to Solar Pearl and Lost Prayer, I'll be switching to a crit damage mask so that we can maintain the crit at about 64, 65, because that makes all the tests fair. Cool? All right. Let's get into testing. Again, remember that my talents are extremely high, so the damage you see with the E and the Q are going to be much larger than what you would probably see, all right? Especially when we go into 5-star weapon testing when it's on my girlfriend's account, because she does not have level 11 talents. She has level 6 talents. It's going to be a lot weaker. So please understand that no matter what, okay, the 5-star weapons in this game are stronger than the 4-star weapons. Even if this test may not show it, it's because my talent levels are different. The only way that I'd be able to test this on my account as if I had the weapons, but I don't. Alrighty, let us begin with the 4-star weapon tests. You guys know what we're going to be doing. Let's start with Mappa Mare first. So with the Mappa Mare, I am looking at 1,664 attack, and you guys can see the stats here. Here we have Mappa Mare at R1 with 1,664 attack. Let's see how it performs. All right, cool. So as you guys can see, that was the Mappa Mare. Moving on to sacrificial fragments. With this weapon, we are dropping our base attack down to 1505. We'll likely be seeing a decrease in basically normal damage. But taking into account the passive of this weapon, it means that you can reset the E. And because her E is so long, beforehand, there actually were some builds with sacrificial Klee. We're still maintaining the same stats. Elemental mastery is much higher here. You can see the vaporizing mult is much higher. So let's see how this performs. So that was sacrificial fragments. You guys can see that Mappa Mare and the sacrificial fragments are decent in terms of damage output. You guys can see that sacrificial fragments is weaker in terms of damage numbers because it has lower base attack, right? So Mappa Mare's base attack is 497 and then sacrificial is 401. Let's move on from these to the energy recharge weapons, Favonius Codex first. Notice that with this weapon, my attack is between the two. My recharge is now 150%. So, as expected, Favonius Codex, middle damage between Mappa Mare and sacrificial fragments because of the base attack. None of the crit rate, crit damage was changed. The thing about this weapon is utility, but I would prefer this utility be on a party member and not on a main DPS. Let's move on to Wine and Song. Now, with this weapon, I'll be utilizing the passive. So, alternate sprint ability, which is basically when Klee sprints, or anyone sprints who wields this weapon, they get 40% attack, which is pretty strong. So, currently, we have back to the Mappa Mare attack, which is 1664. You guys will notice that when we're doing testing, the attack increases to 1987 with the passive. The energy recharge is 138.9. See how it does. All right, so that was Wine and Song. You guys can see that with the passive 40% attack buff, we are doing significantly more than the previous 3 weapons. I think that's expected because this is quite a nice buff. And the attack goes up to 1987. So that is Wine and Song. Let's move on to the attack percent weapons. Frostbear, F2P weapon. With this weapon, our attack is now 1871, maintaining the same crit rate, crit damage, energy recharge, and pyro. That was Frostbear. You can see that Frostbear is weaker than Wine and Song, but it's stronger than the Energy Recharge and the Elemental Mastery based weapons. There shouldn't be any surprise here on the difference of damage. I didn't really talk about the Frostbear's passive because the passive is relatively weak. It did like 1.2k, so kind of ignored it. Let's go to Iron Perception. We are actually maintaining nearly the same attack. We're at 1863 versus 1871, and the main reason is because Frostbear has higher base attack but lower attack percent. No changes in attack. We'll take a look at the passive damage and see how Eye Perception does. Cool. So that was Eye Perception. You guys can see that the weapon passive did 5.6k there, and it happens every 8 seconds. It bounces up to 4 times between enemies. So the passive actually does a decent amount of damage considering all her numbers combined. But yeah, it's just a generic attack percent weapon. If you don't have anything else, this is perfectly fine to use, but look forward to the Dodoco Tales, yeah? Let us move on to the crit-based weapons. We have crit damage, Blackcliff Agate. With the Blackcliff Agate, you guys notice that my attack is lower. We're going to be testing this at 0 stacks because we're against the Cryo Regicide. And with this, our crit damage skyrockets to 191% crit damage, and we are still using a crit rate mask, so I can't really get this any higher. Let's see how this performs. So, as you can see, with the crit damage up, if we do crit, we are doing more damage than the Frostbear and the other attack percent weapons. It would be expected that with more stacks, Blackcliff continues to exceed in damage output. So, with her current playstyle, I would say that this is not that bad. Against mobbing, this is much better. Against bosses, might not be as optimal because of the passive. All right, let's move on to Solar Pearl. With the Solar Pearl, I'm going to be switching to the crit damage mask to maintain my crit rate. You'll see that with Solar Pearl, my crit rate is slightly above. It's like 71%. And our crit damage is 174. So between this and Blackcliff, you should see a relative same damage. All right, that was Solar Pearl. So you can see that with the passive, which sometimes increases my normal attack damage and increases my elemental skill, elemental burst, the damage was slightly more for the normal attack, but weaker charge attack compared to Blackcliff. You can see the change there depending on the passive. Now that's the thing with Solar Pearl. It doesn't increase charge attack damage, so keep that in mind. It's a strong, like, good statistic weapon to have. Okay, so that handles most of the 4-star weapons. Let's move on to Witsith with no buff. So Witsith with no buff, we're going to be switching back to a crit rate mask. We maintain basically the same stats as the Blackcliff, so you guys should be seeing the same numbers. Let's see. All right, so that was Witsith with no buff. You can see that the damage was literally identical to the Blackcliff because they have the same stats. That should be no surprise, maintaining the same stats all around, because you can see that the Witsith and the Blackcliff Agate, same base attack, same crit damage. All right, now let's test Witsith with a proc, okay? So the proc that we are going to be receiving here is the elemental damage one. So you'll see that my pyro damage will be massively increased up to 186%. Okay, as you can see, with the proc, we are doing a massive amount of damage, and this should be expected with the Witsith proc because it's a very large burst. Keep in mind that this will not be maintained for, you know, the duration of a fight unless you can kill it within 10 seconds. On average, given that the Witsith without buff still does a lot of damage, with proc it does insanely high amounts. Definitely the strongest 4-star out there. We'll have to see how it compares with Dodoco Tails. Yeah, so you can see that the mine's damage was not shown there. It was roughly calculated based on the amount of damage we did, but yeah, that's Witsith. All right, so that should wrap up the 4-star weapons that we've been testing out. I do want to include Dodoco Tails at the end discussion here, but I'm going to quickly briefly go over all the weapons and what I think. So obviously we have the elemental mastery weapons, right? Mappa Mare versus Sacrificial Fragment. I'm actually not going to be recommending any of the energy recharge or the elemental mastery weapons currently, due to the fact that I will be going over Dodoco Tails, that you'll see the damage output in comparison to the other ones. All right, the crit based ones and the attack based ones are all relatively equal. I would value Frostbear the least out of all the ones that we tested. Eye of Perception is a good generic attack percent stat stick. I would use Blackcliff and Solar Pro over this one, right? Wine and Song is actually relatively strong with the 40% passive, so if you do have it, because this is a kind of a unique book, it's like limited banner kind of book, so I wouldn't expect newer players to have this. And obviously the Witsith, right? Witsith is super strong. It's basically Blackcliff, but then has a steroid on top of it from its passive, so definitely a nice weapon if you already have one. All right, let's bring out Dodoco Tails briefly. So Dodoco Tails at level 90 is a 55.1 attack percent catalyst with a base stack of 454, with a passive at R1 that is 16% charge attack increase, and then the charge attack hits increase attack percent by 8%. So this is great because this plays into Klee's playstyle that I recommended in the attack rotation section perfectly, because you're going to be weaving normal and charge attacks all the time. So you're going to have this passive up literally all the time, right? At R5, I'm going to probably assume that this is going to be 32%. I'm guessing per refinement it increases by 4%. Seems like the math would work out here. And then the attack percent will be increased by 2% per refinement. So we're looking at 32% charge damage increase and then 16% attack here additionally on top of the base stats. The base stats of this catalyst are identical to the Eye of Perception. My Eye of Perception is level 80, but at level 90, it has the exact same stats as what you see. It has 454 attack and 55.1% attack at level 90. So the damage numbers that you see for Eye of Perception, which we can pull up on the screen, should be what we see Dodoco Tails at without the passive at all. So keep in mind that with these damage numbers, if we include the passive 32% charge attack damage and 16% attack, then you can see that it exceeds basically every single 4-star weapon except for Witsith with the passive proc. That means that Dodoco Tails is recommended above Mappa Mare, above both Elemental Mastery, both Energy Recharge weapons, above the Frostbear, above the Eye of Perception because it's just the better version of it, and then competes at a very high level compared to Solar Pro and Blackcliff Agate. I would say that the 32% charge attack damage actually increases the nuke potential of the charge attack to very high. I would probably... Eye of Perception does 12,100 without the passive. Witsith did 12.4k, and then the Elemental Damage proc did 17k. So I would probably assume that the 32% charge attack damage increases the damage by about 15%. So you can expect that to be maybe 14,000 damage. I feel like is about accurate. Dodoco Tails is definitely strong with the charge attack passive, and then 16% attack also increases the damage output by another like 8%-ish. So we're seeing Dodoco Tails, which is the new upcoming 4-star free from the Midsummer event, be a very strong DPS catalyst, and definitely would rank better than most of the 4-stars except for R5 Witsith. I don't know the comparisons, but I would assume probably R3 is about where it evens out. Very strong free catalyst. Definitely would recommend you guys use it if you are planning to pull for Klee. So yeah, those are my 4-star weapon thoughts. All right, I am back on my girlfriend's account to be able to test out the 5-star weapons. My girlfriend is Psycho. If you guys want, the social links are in the description. But thank you again, honey, for letting me borrow your Klee to be able to test. So she has, again, as I mentioned, 3 5-star weapons that are currently available. Memory of Dust, Lost Prayer, and Skyward Atlas are 180. So the thing is that she is level 80. She is C0, and her talents are all level 6. So they're going to be much weaker in terms of damage output. Before we get into this, though, I want to mention, okay, that all the 5-stars are generally all stronger than the 4-star weapons no matter what. You guys are going to see lower damage numbers here, but that's because the talent is 5 levels lower than my talents, because I can't detoggle any constellations, for example, right? So just keep in mind that let's compare 5-stars to 5-stars. Know that the 5-stars are generally stronger than all the 4-stars, okay? With that being said, then we can go ahead and test properly. So her stats are, again, these are the same as the Yenfei video that we did. So instead of 64 crit rate, we had 62 crit rate, 140 crit damage. I had 140.9. My recharge was 111, hers is 113. Her power damage is the same, just -1 ascension, right? Klee's ascension gives her that 90.4 power damage bonus, which we don't have access to here. So keep that in mind. First weapon to test, Memory of Dust. You can see that we will be testing Memory of Dust with max stacks, without shield and with shield. So 2 different tests, okay? So let's see how this performs. Alright, so that was Memory of Dust with the passive but no shield. You can see that the attack moved from 1979 to 2140. This is without a shield. And again, as you can see that all the damage numbers are lower than the test that we did on my account because my Klee is stronger because C6 and higher talent levels, okay? Let's compare these relatively to each other, knowing that the 5 stars are generally more powerful than the 4 stars. Alright, so next, Memory of Dust with a passive shield. Basically no changes to her stats. Stats are all the same. Let's see how it performs. Alright, as you can see, Memory of Dust with the shield makes her attack go to 2302, and the normal charge attack and passive talent all gained a very nice about 5 to 6% damage increase, which is pretty significant when it comes to weapon differences. That's Memory of Dust. Let's move on to Skyward Atlas, the other attack percent weapon. This weapon has higher base attack, but lower attack percent. With Skyward Atlas, we have 1965 attack, which is relatively close to the Memory of Dust. But we don't have any passive, right? So passive from Skyward Atlas gives us 12% elemental bonus damage. You can see here that that translates to 95%, 12% increase on everything. Cool. Let's see how Skyward Atlas does. So you can see that Skyward Atlas does slightly less damage than the Memory of Dust at max stacks. So you can basically assume that they basically do the same amount of damage, right? If you do have a shield, Memory of Dust will come out stronger. And we do have the 12% elemental damage bonus, but it's not enough to overtake the Memory of Dust passive, which increases your attack by up to 20% at just R1. But still, very strong weapon. The passive of the book does 2,500 damage, which is a little bit of a damage. In general, I would say both of these weapons are relatively equal. If you had the choice, Memory of Dust, if you're running her with a shield, definitely will outpace the Skyward Atlas in terms of damage. Lastly, Lost Prayer. With Lost Prayer, I'm going to be changing to a crit damage mask. You will see that my crit rate is now, it's still maintained about 60-70%. Crit damage is now 175, crit damage mask, and reach is a little higher. So we're going to be testing Lost Prayer with max stacks. So in general, this is not a very good test for Klee because you're going to be switching her out a lot. Keep that in mind that the numbers that you see from Lost Prayer are going to be higher than on the field practicality. Okay, so let's see. All right, excellent. So that is Lost Prayer. You guys can see that the damage output at max stacks is slightly larger than the Skyward Atlas. I think that is expected. But in general, I would view all of these 5-star weapons as relatively equal in terms of damage output. The one thing that I would say is that Lost Prayer has crit rate as a substat on the weapon passive, which makes it easier to build around. As you scale up your artifacts and have crit rate and crit damage on basically all your artifacts, the better Skyward Atlas and Memory of Dust perform. Lost Prayer makes it easier to build early, but scales less valuable probably late game because you're gonna have more equal in terms of stats, right? It'll help you out early, but later on, Scattered Atlas will probably outscale it. Cool. All right, so that is the 5-star weapons. Can never go wrong. Each of them does roughly the exact same amount of damage, and they will be stronger than the 4-star weapons, even though not graphically shown. That's because our cleats are different. So yeah, that should be 5-star weapon wrap up. You guys saw R180 of all of them. Memory of Dust does eke out at the top if you do maximize everything, and it's pretty easy to do so. Memory of Dust it happens to be just a good stat stick, right? Shield strength 20%, always a little bit of a buff there. Thank you to my girlfriend again for letting me use her account to demonstrate the 5-star weapons, and yeah, that should finish the weapon tests. All right, so now that we've completed the weapon tests, let's briefly go over artifact recommendations. So these are going to be similar to the one that I gave for Yanfei, with a little less emphasis on the charge attack amp build. What this means is I'd value 4 Wanderers less than 4 Crimson or a mix of Crimson Gladiator. The Yanfei instance, because she was so charge attack focused, it was actually okay to go for Wanderers. My top recommendation, if you can farm for it, is 4 Crimson. Even if her E cooldown is relatively long compared to other characters, her playstyle falls within 10 seconds window of the 4 Crimson proc, and she enables all the benefits because most team compositions revolve around her Vaporize, Melt, Overload capability. I understand that it's a difficult set to farm a good 4 pieces for, so a great alternative and likely a very common build that I would expect to see is 2 Crimson, 2 Gladiator. The DPS loss is very minimal because most of the time Klee can't keep the 3-stack uptime beyond 10 seconds, even with the attack rotation that we mentioned previously. The E to EQ cancel to E to start off the Q with 3 stacks. Besides Crimson and Gladiator though, Wanderers and Bolide are also viable. Less viable, I would say, than the 2 previous ones, but still viable if the substats are there and if focusing on her charge attack playstyle. So with those 2 artifact sets, it's a less focus on her Q damage. Bolide incentivizes running her with the Shielder, which helps with her upfront playstyle, so it is a good alternative. And then finally, there's 2 Noblesse, which I think is a staple artifact set that many people have pieces for. This is fine to put on her as a stat stick, but keep in mind that her Q goes poof if she leaves the field, so just keep that in mind, okay? Lastly, my personal recommendation for most players is either 4 Crimson or 2 Crimson, 2 Gladiator. For earlier game players, make use of the Berserker set and standard attack percent pieces before you start getting pyro and crit masks, okay? That should explain artifact sets. Let's briefly go over the main stat pieces, okay? For mid to end game, that means AR 45 plus. It's very standard. Attack Sands, Pyro Cup, and a crit mask. In most cases, you guys will be running a crit rate mask, but if you do have a crit rate weapon, then you can go crit damage mask, right? Try to aim for above 50% crit rate, and try to aim for your crit damage to be about double your crit rate, right? That's to optimize your overall damage. And then since Klee scales off of pyro damage from her ascension, she has above 61% pyro because she scales with it. Given this, attack percent cup here with really good substats is an alternative until you get a better pyro cup. It's not as bad as other characters, okay? I do not recommend energy recharge on the Sands because most of her damage comes from her E, normal, and charge rotation. Q is extra DPS whenever it's up, but it's not a primary focus. Also, her passive with crit charge helps slightly with her recharge, so it's even less necessary to run ER. Now, if you're really early game, that means AR 40 or below, or transitioning to AR 45, stick with attack, and slowly move to a crit rate mask and eventually to a pyro cup before you transition mid to end game, okay? That's a quick overview of artifacts. All right, let me give a brief overview of team compositions and general units that I would think would suit well with her. Starting off with Shielders. Now, these are always welcome to any team, given their increase in general team survivability. Given her point-blank playstyle, they are more incentivized to keep her resistance to interruption high while she wreaks pyro nukes over the field. So, notable Shielders. We obviously have Zhongli and Diona. These are the 2 staple Shielders that I've been recommending for basically every single team comp, right? Noelle is also a viable option. She does have basically 0 recharge though, right? Because her E doesn't really generate energy and her Q is very greedy, but she does have a very beefy shield that scales off of her defense, and she also heals, so it is viable. All right, so those are the 3 Shielders, definitely recommended. Zhongli fits in basically every single comp, so that's always a staple. Vaporize enablers. All right, so these are the offensive supports. So we have 3 that we can really talk about. We have Mona. So Mona has a built-in taunt to give Klee room to nuke, which if you don't have a shielder, it's actually really beneficial because the taunt enables her to get her free nukes off. Also, the Q to CC and amplify damage is also nice. Xingqiu is another alternative, right? Always extremely strong offensive support, a really big choice for any pyro DPS, and Klee is no different for that. And then a different one is Tartak. So Tartak is a suitable sub DPS as a switch in if you're running double sub DPS. I wouldn't say anything more than that really. If you want to pair them together, you can go for it. But I would most of the time think that Tartak would be a main DPS for people. So besides that, we have our cryo enablers. Their uptime with melt will usually be much lower, talking reverse melt instead, but still viable team members. Diona. your shielder healer. Rosaria is your crit buffer. Ganyu, if you want to do some sort of milk on you, you can use Klee as kind of sub DPS in both cases. Changyun, reverse melt nuker, not really a defensive support, more of about doing additional damage. And then Kea. So Kea is one of the fastest cryo appliers and is also a point blank kind of Q playstyle. It is possible, right, to get up in their faces after pressing Kea Q. And then Eula. Eula I wouldn't really consider as a crowd support, right? She's more of a physical DPS, so not going to include her in this. All right, moving on to Anemo CCers. So Anemo characters. We have Jean, Venti, Sucrose, and Anemo MC, right? I don't have Anemo MC right now, but just imagine that she's there. All can collect the E mini bombs, which is additional collective DPS. Venti is great for CC, but unfortunately he doesn't collect the E mini bombs. But I mean, grouping up the enemies is always kind of nice, right? Because then Char Deck is AoE. And then that's the Anemo. Very brief touch up. Overload comps. I generally don't recommend Overload Klee because the knockback can be incredibly frustrating to deal with. But I know some players have limited team options. They have no choice, right? In this case, I would recommend Fischl, possibly Beto support. But in general, I would try to avoid Overload Klee because it might be annoying for you guys to play. Brief mention of same type pyro supports that are not healers. Xiangli, if you have her C6, can introduce quite a powerful power support that also assists with Klee's Q uptime by refunding energy to her. That leaves us with the healers, okay? So healers. Bennett is the obvious choice. Pyro resonance, attack buff, cleanse, and healing. Jean, great Anemo choice. Collect and throw her E mini bombs. Great survivability. Also, there's abusing fall damage, right? There's the hybrid DPS aspect to her. Diona is your shielder and healer. Enables her playstyle basically perfectly, right? Noelle, we mentioned shielder and a healer. Her energy generation is lower than Diona, but still viable. And then lastly, Barbara. So Barbara is the last resort healer, I would say. She can enable some vaporize combos, but less more than the dedicated Hydro supports. You can also run Chi-Chi in this kind of same last resort scenario, but Chi-Chi, I feel like kind of like a standalone healer. She doesn't really have high crawl application, more for just keeping your team alive, okay? So that should cover our team compositions. Most of the time, I'll probably be running just like a standard Shielder, Mona, and then Bennett kind of composition, right? Simple like this, or Xingqiu here. So this is typically what I would be running. All right, so now that covers team compositions, I'm going to quickly demonstrate a couple of team compositions that I just enjoy. Most of them are going to involve like shielders and healers and stuff, but you guys can see her playstyle. We are back in Abyss. This is typically my medium for demonstrating or showcasing compositions and builds. So we're going to just use 12-1 first half. I know it's Pyro Wappa Flowers, but you guys can still see general like DPS and like flow of playstyle, right? So I'm just going to give a standard one. Yeah. That's a lot of damage. All right, so that's a quick demonstration of general team comps. You guys can see the Anemo swirling the bombs. You can see a John Lee comp, Diona. I use Banner for like my healer in most of those situations. Xingqiu Mona synergy. The weapon that I was using there was the Witsith. Those just random bursts of damage versus off buff damage. But yeah, so I think that wraps up basically everything that I wanted to discuss on Klee. If you guys did end up making it here, make sure liking and subscribing for more general, fun videos. Guide videos, count reviews, meme builds, general thoughts and patch notes and stuff like that is what I do, okay? So we covered talents, constellations, attack rotation, testing, artifacts, and team composition. And then we had a showcase. So I hope that wraps everything up. Good luck to those who are, trying to get Klee. If you do have Klee, congratulations. I hope this guide helps you out. And that's about it. Thank you guys so much for watching, and we'll see you guys next time.